Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Nordic AI pop-up live from the city center of Lund, where I'm here, Johan Wester, together with my good old friend
Kalle Åström.
Kalle Åström, professor at the university in mathematics.
Yes, and also coordinator for AI Lund, which is an open network for AI at Lund University.
Exactly, and we have been doing this for a couple of times now, doing these digital sessions. The last time we talked about it was the drones and farming and cows and stuff like that.
Yes, drones and farming and AI and farming in many different senses.
Yeah, but today it will be definitely, a total change. We will actually talk about something we all have some kind of relationship to.
Definitely, everyone is searching for things on the internet or using other types of searches on the internet.
So we talk about search engines, and we all use the word, we Google stuff. And what about the company Google? Do they have too much power? That's the kind of discussion we will have tonight.
Yes.
Okay. So we are a group who talk about AI and what can we do, what can university contribute to with, and we found out this connection to the Pufendorf Institute.
Yes, so Pufendorf Institute, it's an institute at Lund University that does sort of, it's like seed funding for in industry. This is like seed for research ideas.
Okay.
So you can apply for having a Pufendorf theme, and then you get to do research on a new topic, on a new constellation of research topics. And this year there's an interesting theme on In Search of Search.
Yes, and you told me about that, and we felt, okay, let's do this.
Yes.
This story about the search engines. Can you give us a broad perspective?
On the theme, on this specific theme. Yes. So we will hear more later today, but very briefly, we're interested in questions like searches. How do searches affect us? How do we as persons or companies, or how do we try to influence what the searches will be? And also, is there like, are there good or bad things about this? And not only searches like Google searches, it can also be like recommender engines, could be how you find interesting songs or YouTube clips or other things. So it's search in a more broader sense also.
And from a mathematical perspective, there's plenty of maths going on, I believe.
Yes, definitely. You want, if you're a provider, you would like these searches or the things that you recommend. You want them to be very good. I mean, you want the users to like them and get good ideas. So there are many interesting machine learning questions on how to do this.
And we will have. Overall about 1 hour and 45 minutes, at the most. We'll see how long it will be. There will be 2 presentations. We will soon hear the first one. They're ready to go in the room next to here. And after that, a short interview, talk
panel
about
discussion here.
Yeah, about what we just heard. And then we will have the, and tell us about the first presentation. It's Olof and Jutta.
Yes, Olof and Jutta, and they're both in this Pufendorf theme.
Olof Sundin, Department of Arts and Cultural Sciences, Lund University, and Jutta Heider, Swedish School of Library and Information Science.
Yes.
So they will give the broader perspective and a short discussion, and then after that we will get help from Germany.
Yes.
We have a Dirk standing over here.
Professor Dirk.
Professor Dirk from Hamburg.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that's great about these Pufendorf themes, is that you get to have some research time to get researchers from different parts of the university, but you also get funding for attracting guest professors, guest visitors to the university. So we have the honor of having Dirk here
as a research fellow.
Yes,
that's the word
Institute.
I've just learned to know it. And of course, you can be a part of this by using the chat forum. You can write your questions if you have any comments or stuff like that. Use it, and we will hopefully, I will hopefully get it to my cell phone. So don't miss the opportunity to ask questions to these gang of professors. And also, we will have a fifth member in the discussion. It will be Amelia Andersdotter. She's a chairwoman of dataskydd.net. She will join in from Brussels, I believe. But that's around 8 o'clock. So until 10 minutes to, around 8 o'clock we will have 10 minutes interval, and then we will have the big panel discussion at the end. So that's the idea. I hope you will enjoy this and relax, take some coffee, a beer, or whatever you want. Now we will start by listening to the broader perspective. Please give a hand. Yes, please give a hand to Mr. Olof Sundin and Mrs. Jutta Heider. Hey there.
Hello, and thank you for the introduction. We are going to talk about a theme, this in search of search, as you heard being introduced just before. And I would like to say hello to my colleagues at the Pufendorf Institute and in the theme that I'm working with. And the special talk here is labeled Making Search Engines Visible. And that is actually what Jutta and I have been trying to do for a long time. Search engines have become very ordinary, mundane, and they are used in everyday life. There's nothing really for the user fancy about them, even though they are extremely complex on the other side, of course. And this mundaneness of search engines have made them more or less invisible for many people. And as researchers, we see that as a task to make them visible, to lift them up and to discuss them. And that is also the theme of a book that Jutta and I published the other year. It's called Invisible Search and Online Search Engines. And as you can see here, there is a broken glass. And the broken glass, the idea behind that is that in a way illustrates or symbolizes how search engines are not visible until they are broken down in some way. And that is something we will get back to soon. The display, you don't see the display until it is broken. And that is also the same with search engines. So, why are search engines important to discuss? I will say a few words about that so we could have a common ground while listening to the rest of the evening. And first of all, I would claim they are society's key infrastructure for becoming informed. Just as we turned to encyclopedias before, we turn to search engines today. So, and just as a pupil in school often start by Googling just as they went to the library before. Not that libraries are unmodern or not in use anymore, but Google has become, or search engine has become, the starting point for many kinds of investigations, for curiosity, for wanting to know things. And of course you have to take these figures, not as exact figures, but it is claimed that every second Google search processes on average 40,000 search queries every second over the globe, of course. And according to a survey, Svenskarna och internet, 61% of the Swedish population report Googling daily. And I would say that is underreported because, just as I said in the introduction, we don't think about it. So when filling out the form, we might say no, while we have maybe been Googling many times during the same day. And search engines don't just provide answers to questions. They also, you could say, legitimize knowledge claims as such. By popping up high in search results, they are seen as important, or even most important. And you could also say, even though you have to put a quotation marks around neutral because that is a very difficult concept. But search engines can never be neutral. There is always an order presented. Something has to come up first, most visible. And what that is not something based on that this source or this piece of information is the most essential or most qualitative or anything. It's just the result of a number of factors that are involved in search engines, so that we are supposed to be as satisfied, of course, as possible. And a very, very brief history. And let's start 1994. We could find our way on the web through lists, web hierarchies, web directories, or we could search with the search engines. And for those of you who have been around for a while, you remember maybe Web Crawler or Lycos, and Excite, I think, was another one. And they were often developed within a university setting, non-commercial university setting to start with. But what happens since then, and through many stages in between, is that we have a super commercial search engine environment, and the academic services went to commercial products, of course. And there is also a kind of development, or at least change, where you could see that we are, as searchers, we are less searching for links, but there are more and more facts or content popping up as something called knowledge graph, where you, instead of getting, for example, if you're searching for apple pie, or if you're searching for a certain game or whatever, you get a list of links, but you also often get a fact presented on the top or the top right. So there is a move to providing the user with a fact more than just providing it with links. And there is also moves in the industry talk about that you should not only be a reaction on users' requests, but you should even provide information to the users before the users even know that they wanted to know something. So you can claim that there is a move from search engines to suggest engines, if you like. And all these changes has made search engines become less and less visible for us as users, and more invisible.
We carried out quite a number of interviews and focus groups and other types of conversations with people in different walks of life, with students, with people in their everyday lives, with people in their job situations, with the pupils and so on. And we talked with them about their searching, about their perception of search engines, about their not searching, about the algorithms and how they are aware of them and how they try to make sense of this digital information environment we are immersed in. And what we could see is that it is really quite striking how deeply interwoven everyday life is with the use of search engines. And search engines are there for people when they are going to the doctor, when they are patients, when they are students, when they are working, when they are parents, when they are citizens. Search engines come in everywhere, and mostly they are unnoticed, unless they don't function, as Olof was commented on earlier. And I'll show you a quote from a pair interview that we did with two young teenagers in their late teens. About the conversation was first it was about when did you start using social media, and they had quite clear conception of when that was. But then the interviewer asks, but do you remember when you started to use Google, searching on Google? No, Louise says. So was it much earlier? Yes. it is a lot older. I remember in like 2nd grade on the school computers using Google, but no, I don't know, Linda. No, I don't remember either. It just feels like you've always used Google. Somebody else comments on, for instance, that, yeah, you start using Google, like when you start using a computer, when you start learning to write, that's when you start using Google. There's no period in time when you are sort of becoming literate that does not involve Googling. It is totally normalized, invisible in that way. This was quite a typical, actually, quote here. So, search engines and other digital services are sometimes described as infrastructures. So infrastructures are usually not noticed until they stop working. They are considered to be, it's one of the defining characteristics of a very famous conception of infrastructures is that they become visible on breakdown. And that's the case for, the trains. When they don't work, we notice that there are problems with it. Or electricity. We don't think about the lights being on unless electricity fails and so on. And the same is the case for search engines, but they work most of the time, at least technically. But as Olof says, they have become so essential in our way of life and in how we structure society, everyday life, how we access all kinds of information, that it is probably time to think of search engines as critical infrastructures. That is, critical infrastructure is a notion that implies that certain infrastructures support societal needs that are so basic that they need to be designated and protected in particular ways. Usually we think of things like water. Yeah, the water supply has to be, to a certain degree, electricity, things like that. Healthcare. These are sort of critical infrastructures. But search engines, since they are the way to knowing all these things, can almost be considered critical infrastructures in certain ways. This is a definition actually taken from the European Commission Council Directive on Essential Services, where they describe search engines in these terms. Online search engine means a digital service that allows users to perform searches of, in principle, all websites in a particular language on the basis of a query or any subject in the form of a keyword, phrase or other input, and returns links in which information related to the requested content can be found. This is interesting. That's from 2016. And this quote, this definition, actually does not include this new transition of search engines into suggest engines, which make them even more critical in terms of that they are even more invisible and even more taken for granted. So, they become visible on breakdown. And I want to just quickly mention one sort of breakdown that is not usually talked about so much, and which is different from the technical breakdown that we just experienced, for instance. A breakdown where the glass of meaning becomes visible, if you want, in the metaphorical way, which we have started to call frictions of relevance. What do we mean by that? Normally, when you carry out a Google search, the results are presented in some order of relevance. Whatever that relevance, how that relevance is calculated is up for discussion, but it's what the search engine has calculated to be, in all likelihood, the result that the user will experience as most relevant, and that also satisfies the other part in this game, which is the commercial actors are using Google as a platform for advertisement. So this somewhere there is relevance situated, and that's very interesting. And sometimes, and not so rare, sometimes these relevance rankings break down, and what we get does not actually does not correspond to what we expect to get. We might get a result that is very against our expectations. It might be a result against societal values. It might be a result that is very much against personal values. It could be a classic example would be you could get very anti-Semitic or racist search results, which would clearly sort of, for most people hopefully generate some sort of relevance frictions or a stepping back. Why is this considered a relevant answer to this query? Or the kind of different groups in society creates a conflict. And these frictions of relevance, where the Google's or the search engines calculated relevance and the result it presents does not correspond, but conflicts with the relevance expectations and the values, that societal relevance or individual relevance. These frictions are interesting. These frictions can be conceptualized as one way of breakdown. So, what I want to conclude with is just a call for exploiting frictions of relevance and other frictions of breakdown and glitches for education and awareness. Do not try to... This is the way search engines want to work. They want to be, and other technologies, they want to be very smooth, very user-friendly, very much in the background. You should not be able to see them. And of course, in a way, that's very convenient. But it also means that if they are not visible, you cannot actually, it becomes harder and harder to question them and to build also momentum for control, for instance, or legislation, which is needed as well. So what I want to call for is to sort of an awareness of these frictions. Take them seriously. Don't see them as an annoyance only. Exploit them. Talk about them. Remember them. Note them. And exploit them also for education, for raising awareness, for lobbying, and so on. That's, I think, an interesting thing to do, to look at the frictions and exploit them. So, in order to prepare a critical preparedness, we need to handle these frictions in a productive and creative way. Thank you.
So, welcome back to the studio. We got sound to everyone, and I hope you can hear loud and clear what Olof and Jutta was talking about. Welcome. That's let's
I'm the one with the sound problems.
no.
I'm getting known as this person.
So, well, thank you so much, both of you. I wonder if you compare the situation today with how it was 20 years ago and 10 years ago, because when we went to school together, it was...
You did.
Yes, we did actually. Then we didn't have computers in school, but later on, it was all about Alta Vista, and then we have Yahoo, and there are plenty of them. And now it's not just Google, but what happened to the others? Tell us about, compare 20 years ago, 10 years ago with now. Olof?
Well, time flies, right? I would claim that search engines was much more visible in our everyday life. We thought about them much more, even though everyone knows about Google and there is a verb about Googling, that we don't think about them. It's like if you take the comparison with the encyclopedia, if you have this dinner location and you want to check something up, there is a moment of break. You need to walk up, you need to go to the bookshelves, you need to bring it out. And just think about the first search engines. You have to start a computer, you have to wait for hours before Netscape pop up. And
Netscape.
Yeah, or Mosaic. So it couldn't be a part of the routines. It couldn't be mundane in that way. And so
you mean because now it's sort of integrated into the browser,
it's
heading
integrated
and in the phone
not just in the
everything.
browser. It's integrated in the car, in your Google Assistant if you have one, and also in other items more and more, I guess, in the future. And also the market is extremely different from a non-profit built web crawler search engines in '94 to Google. It's such a tremendous change. And I would also say that the competition is that is something Dirk will come back to. But I would guess that the number of players are and the possibilities of experimenting, of bringing up something new, the starting.
So there's a much higher threshold.
It's a much higher threshold to get visibility and to get.
So just by having more competitors, is that helping the awareness that you realize this is a choice? I go to, I think Alta Vista is better, or is that helping?
Well, it's a complex situation. That would be, of course. It depends, of course, how this kind of possibility for competition would be handled by the other actors in the market. If you have like agreements with the smartphone providers with certain actors, and how difficult it would be to change, but it would definitely be an improvement to sort of be there be an actual competitor to Google to challenge Google.
But can't you say that, well, there's been a competition and they are, they must be the best because they're not in the game anymore, and it's good in one way. When we have one example, they're really into it. They are developing it. Isn't that good?
Well, the thing is that when search engine and the use of search engine is taken for granted, and it's taken for granted that it is Google. And you see Google as I try to explain, as more and more as a fact machine, and without even thinking that the results could be different. There is not just one way of presenting knowledge about drugs or the history of Balkans, as you know. There are many ways of explaining that, but when you have one search engine that you don't even think exist in the way, that just is there in the background, then it becomes a problem. And then we need to work in order to make it visible for us, not in order for us to turn on the computers and start up Netscape again, but we need to bring it up into the air and see it could be different. It could work different, and the lack of competition is a major problem.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, it's not just it's. I would also like to add that it's also the way in which Google is shaping what there is to know, not just in terms of what results you get when you search, is also what type of information is produced. It's produced for Google, specifically with Google in mind. So if you make an event, if you product a service, if you are an authority, whatever, everybody tailors their content to be searchable in Google, specifically in relation to this search engine. And it's also changes, it has an enormous market power, not just in the search engine market, but on the entire market. And it's not just search engines that it provides. They had other services. It's a network of very different products that Google pulls together, and the amount of data and the monopoly that creates is, it's not just the search engine. It has to be seen in a large context. But yes, it's a good search engine, of course.
But Google, they of course are aware of the situation,
yes.
And don't they feel a greater responsibility because we have this position, people rely on us, therefore we cannot use this too much for our own gain? They must work with it, otherwise people will turn on them.
It works tremendously well. I'm using Google every day. I am in trying to use competitors, because there are competitors, the last months in our research theme, but it is difficult, I have to admit. But when and Google, they are doing a lot of really, really good things, and they are also trying to, in many ways, to fulfill the customer's wish. But and they have, or at least they used to have, a slogan: "Don't be evil." but I don't know if they have that anymore.
No, they don't have it anymore.
And it's I become a bit scared when they change that. Oh, let's take away that slogan. But what happens if they don't? I mean, if they decide, if they are bought up by someone else, or if they decide something else?
Well, it's impossible to be bought up if you're...
Yeah, it's impossible. But
China could buy them. Why isn't that possible?
It's too large, I think. But it's not. It's a question of principle. Yeah, it's a question of principle. Do you want to have one actor that dominates all information flows, not just the information in terms of content, but also the information about people, the information about product, services, everything? It's one actor, and that is a commercial actor in the end. It's what's called a multi-sided platform, meaning that it wants to create large collections of data to cater to different users, and we are not the only users, the ones to do the searches. There are the other users as well, which sort of brought together on this site, this platform, commercial users, and that's where the money is made in bringing these together, and that is the most important. And that's how these algorithms work, and that's understandable, right? It's a business.
But it's well, of course, I realize when I listen to you and I read about it, this almost in a monopoly situation. But we are consumers, we are customers. We can choose here. So if we are not satisfied, then we won't buy it. There are others. Search engines. Yeah. Isn't that a way to solve it?
Yes, it could be part of the solution, but there aren't really any other search engines that have the same index to search on as Google has. So if you search in Google, you search on a much larger database of content than in any other search engine, and there is a problem there. And Dirk is going to talk about that in detail, and we'll return to that discussion later on as well. But it is not just the search engine, it's also the material you have to search on, which is a problem here.
In the theme, you're also discussing other types of searches, not only searches, but also recommender engines and other ways that are sort of not traditional searches. And I like the aspect that you have, that you want to raise the awareness of when am I actually searching and what does this mean, the result when I'm searching. Could you say something about the sort of recommender systems and how it have thoughts about that, or how it influences us, or because I guess there are other players there for recommender systems when you do YouTube or Spotify or.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you find recommendation system through Google as well.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, but they share the same basic principle, and that is what people think is most popular, or also what is most visible. So it's kind of a wheel that reinforces itself in a way. And I don't know really what I could add about recommending service, but they work pretty much. The consequences are the same, at least, even though they work different.
What about the need for change, or the need for awareness? You talk about awareness about these things. Would that be a great change if we all started thinking about it and reflecting and demanding stuff? You can't do like that. Is that couldn't that be the change, or do we have to change the system?
I mean, awareness and an interest in changing something is a prerequisite. But then I think it has to be through regulation, really, in the end. It's not something. This is a gigantic, structural, systematic problem, and a huge actor that you cannot be outside of. Basically, it's not something that you can solve with individual awareness. But individual awareness in a democratic society can be part of raising of demanding regulation. Yes.
And there is also a problem. We have submitted an article, Jutta and I and Dirk, about the way Google are putting their hands on the results and maybe influence them in a way that is not just algorithmically based. So for example, if you search for COVID today, you get all kinds of information that is not from the natural web. It's not the links, it's data from your local services and so forth, and there are links to the public health authority and so forth.
That's Google taking responsibility.
Yeah, that is where Google is taking responsibility. That is where Google is trying to play with the society, the government and so forth. But you could easily see it could happen in other countries or systems or whatever, when Google is taking a responsibility that is maybe not, I'm not saying it happens now, but it could happen in a, let's say for example in a dictator. If Google is taking the responsibility there, like Baidu is doing in China, that responsibility is not maybe good for democracy or for the people, so to speak. So the question is good for who, so to speak.
We will soon list Dirk, and he will develop some more thoughts. But we have a couple of questions that just ran through our chat forum. It's Juan Jose Ocampo Pava. I hope I got some right there. To the panel, he asks, what do the panelists think about Google MUM project? MUM. I don't know what that is.
Maybe you could save that for Dirk.
Okay.
Yep.
Dirk will be able to.
Let's leave it to Dirk. Okay, we come back to that one. And then we have from Lyckan96. What do the panelists think about paying for Google searches instead of companies relying on ads? Who would that be better?
I don't think it would be possible. I don't think it has ever been possible. Not even in the early days of Lycos. It was only. I mean, first it was built on public funding by universities, but then it was advertised money. So I don't think anyone would pay for this type of search engines. There are other types of databases, very precise medical databases, or other types of not this broad web search engines where you could get people to pay, but not for the general web search, I don't think.
Also, if it is a critical infrastructure or an essential service or something that at least sort of approaches this status, it would be difficult to have a paid for service. That is that would exclude people. So if it is a societal responsibility to maintain that service, because this is the way we can navigate information, all information more or less, all mediated information, then if that's a paid for service, it's extremely discriminatory.
So then it would probably be paid for by taxes or some other way. If you change the system, you would probably have another way to finance it, I guess.
Yeah.
Finally, we talk about regulations, then we come to politics. On what level are the politicians on this subject? Do they understand? Some countries they are totally aware of it. In other countries, no, we can't be bothered. We don't think it's a problem. What are the level?
I think. I mean, they are definitely discussing Google and social media platforms in the US, for example. Particularly, there is a critique from the right now about Google having a left bias. They claim, and there in Germany, I think there has been, but there I don't know really. It's a little bit of thin ice. But if you could say that in Russia and China, they have a definitely a big interest in the search results and how they look like. They need to be brought up on an international level, the question. So it's not enough. Sweden can't do very much more than educate people by creating the awareness. But if you want to make a change, if you want to make something happen, then it needs to be, I think, on a European level.
What about the level of trust within the society in the Scandinavian Nordic countries? We have, what I've learned, higher level of trust to the society. Are we more naive when it comes to these matters? Or if you don't rely on the society and the police, then you're skeptical even to Google. Is that a...
In general, people rely on Google very, very much. I don't think the Nordic countries stand out there very much. People trust Google very much. First of all, it's a great service, so it's not strange in a way. But also, it's just taken for granted. It is Google.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just speculation. I see where you're getting at. We don't know that. It could be.
That's my job, to speculate. Yeah. You give the answers, you know. So, so it's pure speculation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Dirk, he will talk about the search problem and how an open web index could help solve the search problem. How would you describe the search problem? We've been talking about it, but
the search problem is there is one search engine only, and an open index, Dirk will explain, could be part of the solution. Not the only solution, but it could be a bit part on the way to having more diversity.
One search engine to rule them all.
That's where we're on now.
Yeah.
I got the Lord of the Rings feeling. Okay, so we will continue here, but first we will listen to Dirk, and then we have a short discussion, an interval, and then the big discussion. So here's Professor. Here's a long title. Professor of Information Research and Information Retrieval, Hamburg University of Applied Sciences, and affiliated to the Pufendorf Institute for Advanced Studies at Lund University. I give you Dirk Lewandowski.
I will be talking about, as said, the search problem, which is basically that we only have one search engine, or I will show that we have a couple of search engines, but it's only one that really dominates the market. And I will propose that with an open web index, we might be able to overcome the search problem and foster competition on the market. And even more importantly, one thing is competition, and the other thing is access to the information of the world and how we would organize it and make it really accessible to all and make it useful to all, which is Google's company motto, by the way. Anyway, I think every presentation on search has to start with some data on the search engine market. And if we look at the search engine market in Europe, we see this data, which I think you can't read the names of the search engines, but it doesn't matter because the long bar is Google, and it shows that Google has 93% of market share in the European countries. If we look at the US, we basically have the same situation. It's a bit better in terms of competition, where Google only has a market share of 88%. And if we look at the whole world, at the global market, we can see that Google has a market share of 92%. So it's really one player dominating the whole search engine market. And the first question is whether this is a problem, and if so, why this is a problem. So in the following, I will say why the market situation from my point of view is a problem. Then I will present the idea of an open web index, which I think is one way to solve this search problem. And it also is a way not only to establish one competitor to Google, but to build an infrastructure where we can build many search engines on top. And of course, we can also use this infrastructure to build other systems, search systems or otherwise. So what Google says about search is that search is a reflection of content that exists on the web. And of course it is. However, there are many possible algorithmic interpretations of the content that is on the web, and Google's interpretation, as we already heard, is just one of many, many possibilities. The problem being, we as users can't see from the results how this interpretation works, and we just have the results. We can't see all the results. We see the top results, we choose from them, and we base our decisions on these results. And these decisions, well, are often trivial, and it's about looking up facts, it's about looking up websites. But on the other hand, we search for information to base really important decisions upon, which, for instance, is decisions on whom to vote for, or when we search for health information, what kind of treatment to get. I mean, there's the saying of Dr. Google, because people usually consult Google before they consult their doctor. So the problem here is that Google, as a commercial company, decides what we get to see and what information we build our decisions on. And to put that into relation in terms of numbers, we already heard in the first talk that Google, how many queries Google serves per second. So I would like to say that number for the whole year, and this is 2 trillion queries. And if you ask yourself what a trillion is, it's a very large number, and that's basically is. It's unimaginable how many queries they serve and what decisions are based on what Google gives back as results. So a misunderstanding in the discussions about search results is that there's one correct set of results or one correct form of ranking the results. We already heard that, well, there are the frictions of relevance, the points where we see that something goes wrong and we have a disturbing result or whatever. But it is not a matter of just improving the search engine in terms of, well, bringing it nearer to the perfect result set. There is no such thing as a perfect result set. And therefore, to release us from only one of many possible algorithmic interpretations of the content of the web, we need more search engines. And now that we established that we need more search engines, let's see how this challenge has been approached so far. So the problem is largely agreed upon, but different solutions have been proposed. And here are the 4 most popular, I would say. So the first solution, or might be solution, is to leave it to the market. Anyhow, the problem is that at least what we saw in the last 15 years or so, there is no change within the market. So Google dominates this market and no real competitor has shown up, with one exception, which is Microsoft's Bing. And what Microsoft did is they put billions of dollars into developing and establishing Bing, but with the result that they only got a market share of 3% in Europe and 6% in the US. So search engines are still, for most people, equated with Google search. Then the next 2 proposed solutions supporting competing companies, the French approach 15 years ago, or establishing a public search engine like proposed by the Australian Green Party last year, basically say we have to establish one other search engine as a competitor to Google, either through subsidizing a company who will build it, or to build a publicly funded public search engine. The problem with these approaches is that first, you only build one alternative. So the question here is, would the situation be any better if we had another competitor? Of course it would, but it would be just one. What I will be proposing in a minute is a solution that would make thousands of different search engines possible and also other services as said. Another drawback of the approach to establish just one competitor is that search engines can fail for multiple reasons. So maybe you build the best search engine in the world, but your marketing is very bad, so nobody will use it, and you will fail for that reason. And then all the effort is gone. So the situation is the same as before. That leaves us with the 4th solution, which is building an open web index. In the following, I will show why I think the idea of an open web index is superior to the approaches I just mentioned. To understand what distinguishes this idea from the other proposed solutions, we have to at least briefly look in how a search engine operates. So on the slide, you see the classic diagram, which is the basic architecture of a search engine. From the left to the right, we have the World Wide Web with all the data and contents of it. And then the search engine starts with crawling these pages. So they try to find everything on the web and put it into a database, which is here called the local store, and we can think of it as a copy of the web. And this copy of the web has to be comprehensive, and it has to be current, which is a problem I will detail in a minute. The next step is to make all this content in the copy of the web searchable, which we call indexing. And then there's another module, which is the one we see, or at least we see the results of that module, which is the searcher. And we as end users query the search engine, and the searcher works with the queries and compares them to the documents, matches documents and queries, and ranks the results. That's basically what we see from a search engine, what we understand from it. But key to developing a search engine is having the index. And you can see here, again, a number in the trillions. This time even 130 trillion is the number of URLs that Google knows. So you can imagine how big such an index has to be. It's numbers we can't even imagine, and it is a real technical. It is technical and a huge financial effort to build such an index. As said, no company has an index comparable to Google's. Even Microsoft's is way smaller, even though, as I said, they put billions into establishing their search engine. So the idea here is that we build the index, the database of websites, the copy of the web as a public infrastructure, while the services built on top of the index can be non-commercial, they can be commercial. You can do whatever you want with the data because you have access to this index. You're free to use it. You don't have to build your own index before you can even start building a search engine. You can build your search engine on top of this index. So to go a bit into the architecture of such an index, very much simplified. On the bottom of the slide, you can see the same process again. We have the World Wide Web. We have now a crawler from the Open Web Index crawling it, putting the data into the Open Web Index. And then you have some pre-processing steps. And the important part is where you see the blue line. The blue line separates what the index is, what the public infrastructure is, from the services. So same as in the first figure, you can see on the top, users query a service, and the service gets data from the index, and every service can do their own ranking. They can do with the data whatever they want. And this allows for establishing multiple services on top of the same index. So services use the same data, but can build completely different services on top of that. I would like to go very briefly into the possible applications. And of course, search is an important application here. We have general purpose web search, so trying to search all the web. But there's much more to the approach of the Open Web Index. You cannot only build search on top of it, but also you can use it for science and research. To use the data for that, you can do commercial data analysis. And of course, we're talking here about artificial intelligence. So for artificial intelligence, you need vast data sets that you can use for learning. And what better data could you have than data from the web and have data web scale? And last but not least, I would like to stress that also combining the data from the web with proprietary data would allow for completely new applications. So as we can see here, and these were just a few examples, we can see that web search may be the most important application of this Open Web Index. But it is only one possible applications from a real vast set of other applications that would be possible if we had this index. So I'd like to conclude by summing up. The vision here is to build a public library of the web. So we have all the data from the web and we make it public for everyone to use. Not having one commercial company having all the data and deciding what we see from it. Then we have the technical idea, which is to separate the index from the services that are built on top of that index. And an important distinction is public versus private. So the index should be public, but the services can be proprietary. They can also be non-commercial, whatever. So everybody should profit from the index, whether commercial applications or others. Thank you.
And thank you, we say, Dirk. Welcome back. Well, you haven't been here yet. But so, first of all, tell us about your 3 months here in Lund.
Yeah, that's correct.
As a
I think the title is Visiting Research Fellow, and I'm very proud of it because it sounds so great.
Yes, it definitely does. And fascinating the ideas you're proposing. Is this a common idea, or is this quite unique, and you think you will have to struggle a lot for it, or do you feel that this is what people believe in?
Well, it is quite unique because when we're talking about alternative search engines, the first thing that comes to mind is always to establish one competitor. And as I said, this is a vast misunderstanding because I don't believe in establishing one competitor, but to really foster competition by having numerous search engines. And so it is often difficult to explain the difference between the two. So, I mean, I know it's rather complicated technical stuff, thinking about the index versus thinking about the whole system of the search engine. But the index part is really key to establishing competition.
We will soon have a bigger discussion about this idea, but the first thing that pops in my head is that what about financing? This will cost a lot of money, I believe.
True, yeah.
And we heard about Facebook? They tried to build. Is it Bing?
No, Microsoft.
Microsoft, yeah. And they put loads of money into it, and they didn't give up, but it didn't reach the position they wanted.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about do you know how much money that will be needed?
That's a very common question when I talk about this. It really is difficult to say. It's obviously in the billions, but what we would need is a kind of a feasibility study to really see how much it would cost.
Yeah, and that will be sorry.
Yeah, but I guess the thing is that if you want 10 competitors now, you would have to build 10 indices, and so it will be more costly. If we do this in this way, it would be just one index and one cost, but it could still be shared by many different competitors.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think that's one of the key things.
Yeah, still the question is whether you want to have some companies being together and building this, or whether you want to really have it as a public infrastructure, and that I think makes a vast difference.
But then you have tax money that goes to this, and you have who will contribute, who will pay? Different countries, all countries.
I think it has to be a multinational effort, and I think the European Union would be the best candidate because when you look at web indexes, we see that the USA have indexes which is Google's and Bing's, and we have Russia with Yandex, a small competitor worldwide, but which has a very large market share in Russia, and we have Baidu in China. So it's a strategic thing, I would say, to have your own access to the world's information, which it is. And Europe doesn't have such, doesn't have a single company having such an index.
But what happens when Germany says yes, Sweden says yes, but Portugal, no, we don't want to be involved with this, and France, no, nothing for us?
When then I would say welcome to the EU. But of course, I mean, it could be something where some states say we want to have this and we want to have this built. But I think as a European effort, it would make much more sense. And of course, you have to convince all the countries.
Yeah, and the others who don't pay, they can use it as much.
Well, in the talk, I didn't speak about payment for using the index. Having a free or an open index does not mean that nobody has to pay for access to it, because as usual, when you have application programming interfaces and you have access to data, you usually have an amount of free queries that you can make, and if you do more than that, you have to pay for it. And it can be a very fair deal.
We will continue. I have so many questions here, but I think it's time for about 10 minutes interval. So stretch your legs, take a cup of coffee or whatever you want to do, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. And then Amelia Andersdotter will join us all the way from Brussels, I hope. So, since we have COVID regulations, I believe Olof, you will participate from the other room. So let's see if this works. Now 10 minutes break. Good to have you here, Dirk. See you soon, everybody, and write your questions in the chat forum. See you soon. So welcome back after this short interval where we will now have a bigger discussion of what we've just been presented, we're listening to. Dirk, he's back. Jutta, she's over here. Kalle, and then I believe Olof is with us from the other room. Are you there, Olof? Okay, let's see if we get the. There you are. I hope you can hear us. And all the way from Brussels, we have Amelia Andersdotter, chairwoman at dataskydd.net. Hello, Amelia.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. Yeah, it's good weather. Summer is coming.
So this is Brussels
Lots
then?
of rain. Yeah, it rains every day.
Oh, and you just been to your French lesson you wrote to me. What have you learned today?
Yeah, it's like a bilingual city here with Brussels. So I already sort of conquered the Dutch. So now it's French to speak with public administration and service people and such.
Fantastic.
Very nice language.
Well, good to have you with us. You might have listened to Dirk and his has thought about an open web index, and I will hear about your opinion about that in just a minute. But before that, can you tell us about your relationship to these questions, your history, and what you're doing at the moment?
Well, currently I work for an organization that gathers European country code to top levels domain in Brussels. It performs advocacy efforts with respect to the European institutions, and also is a platform for exchanges of experiences and lessons learned from operating internet infrastructure. But I've been in information and internet policy for the past 10, 15 years, let's say. Full-time, as in remunerated, for at least 12 years. And so over the course of those 12 years, I've ran across issues related to search. Web service autonomy, why isn't the European Union producing any web services of its own of equal size to the American web services? What is the relative economic strength of American actors in all levels of the information economy or ecology with respect to Chinese or US enterprises? And so in my capacity as chair of datafeed.net, I've of course also reflected a lot on the power and autonomy of the individual in an information landscape that is increasingly dominated by very large enterprises and also very powerful governments, and especially very large enterprises and governments who are working in cohort to reduce the relative freedom and autonomy of individuals.
Well, thank you for that. And since we're talking about the Open Web Index, what are your thoughts when you hear about Dirk's suggestion?
So it fits in a kind of longer discussion that I think has already been present in Europe since at least the 1970s. Let's say that how do we create information autonomy for ourselves? Are we in fact being colonized by particularly American enterprises who are very successful in building hardware solutions in the 1970s? You think of IBM in public sector institutions. When Google became prominent in the early 21st century, you had Quero, which was a European project to not exactly create an open web index, but at least reflect and research upon search. And so now we see that kind of coming back as an industrial policy issue again. Digital sovereignty is a word that is often repeated in Brussels as an aspirational goal. We need European services. Or often actually, and this is a bit annoying, French services that all the other Europeans are supposed to use. So fundamentally, what search engines need to do, though, is help people find on the internet what they want to find. And it just so happens that Google has been extremely good at doing that. And it's not easy to compete with because they have really big budgets. And they're also operating from a jurisdiction which gives them the flexibility with capital and copyright and data protection, and that they've been able to develop their services in a direction that it turns out a large number of internet users all over the world want. And so maybe my initial reflection on an open web index is, we need to reflect on the conditions that enabled Google to be successful, and then perhaps also reflect on why those conditions aren't necessarily true in the European Union. And I think there are some obvious threads to be pulled in here, actually, I would imagine.
Well, thank you. Dirk, do you agree?
Well, I absolutely agree that we have to see things in the larger context. It was very nice to see what Amelia said about it's about a discussion that also already is from the 70s and it spans on. And the question is what on a European level we really can do about it. Yeah.
So when it comes to we talked about money earlier, and we say, okay, that's solved. Even though I realize, but when it comes to the legislation, what do we need to get from that perspective enabled to make it a European project? Jutta?
Dave knows a lot more and has put a lot of thought into this, but in my conception, the Open Web Index doesn't necessarily have to be a European project. It happens to be that Europe doesn't have this data sovereignty like the US or China, and that we are in Europe, and that the European Union is a powerful actor that could play a role, but it's not said, and that's we are discussing it because in these terms here, but it's not the only option. I think what you want to suggest is not necessarily that Europe needs alternative search engines and the competition in that. It's that the world needs that, in fact.
Yeah, and I think the European Union would be an actor that comes to mind, but not necessarily, as you said, it doesn't have to be the European Union. It could be other actors.
It could be the US.
Yeah.
Amelia, since you're in Brussels and you're all day long you have European, all the Europeans around you, most of them at least. What are your thoughts? Would that be a project you believe in, that we could do this together from a legal perspective?
Well, I mean, Google image search was almost criminalized in Germany based on German copyright law. And so for anyone who's ever used Google image search and found that beneficial to their activities, you have to reflect that there are a lot of legal issues in not just at the European level, but also in the member states that create information environments that we as Europeans aren't able to relate to. I mean, even crossing borders in Europe is entering different information spheres. So, and the European legislators are just not able to deal with that well. But there are European search engine projects. There's one currently running called Quant in France. It's mandatory to use Quant as your default search engine in the French parliament. So, I mean, this is sort of tried. But then we have other more interesting examples like Seznam in the Czech Republic, which was an early mover in the Czech search market. They used to have something like 70-80% market shares in the beginning of the 21st century because they were able to index Czech content websites very well. Now I think their market shares are dropped to something like 20-30%. The way that they've stayed moderately competitive with respect to Google is by being an integrated news portal and search engine, kind of like Alta Vista back in the day, or maybe Yahoo in Japan still functions this way. But then Seznam finds itself under a barrage of European legislation that is specifically targeting Google and Google's news search activities. So now, Seznam operates in a kind of quasi-legal space at the mercy of the Czech implementation of European directives, while at the same time also having an extremely disadvantageous tax situation with respect to Google, because Seznam's market is really the Czech Republic. They can't necessarily move to Luxembourg and make big deals with Jean-Claude Juncker like Google can, or purports to be able to do. And so we have some examples, like successful examples of web innovation in the European Union, which have not only not been encouraged, but also kind of actively quashed. So when I hear some of these, nice visions for open web indices and such, it's not that I don't spiritually agree. I think it's a fantastic idea, and were it realizable, sure. But I also see the European Union as kind of, monkey with a gun targeting its foot, if I'm perfectly honest. It's not obvious to me that the European Union has the self-organizational skills to do this.
Let's see what the panelists say. Is it a monkey with a gun? Is that what I heard? Dirk, you hear what she's talking about?
Well, I can't comment much on legislation because that's not my area of expertise. And I think maybe we're talking a bit too much about the European Union being the actor to do it, and then we talk about all the challenges that are involved. It could also be a national state or something. As Jutta said, it is not important, I think, to address the European Union or to address one singular state, or as you said, trying to get state actors together from different states. So it doesn't matter in the end. It's about that we have the vision, and it would really solve a problem, I think. And now the question is, who can do it?
So what about we're talking about the search engine. We do searches, and we this is something that we are aware of, and then we have all the others, the searches and all the information that's gathered around us all the time. Yeah. And what I've understood, it's much of this information definitely affects how the searches are done. Will that be involved in this new version, the new alternative?
Well,
that kind of espionage?
No, of course not. And
But I mean, they're listening and they're seeing what we do.
I mean, to do a search engine that really is useful, you need usage data. But you don't need data from the individual users as Google and other search engine companies collect them. So the idea within the Open Web Index framework is to collect user data, to anonymize it, to make it, to collect it on the index level, and to make it available to the other actors, to the services. So it's a kind of an interchange of usage data, not user data, because you need that data. And coming back to the question Kalle asked earlier about search and recommendation, from my point of view, it's basically the same, because when you have all the user data and I know who you are, I can enter the query for you. We have now, if you enter a query, it's query interpretation. So if I type in London, Google knows that I've been to London many times and I prefer to fly there and whatever. And so it would be easy if the search engine knows that I go to London every summer to just, enter that query for me, so to say, and show it. And this really, I agree with what Olaf said, that this is really problematic. And we can, circumvent it by collecting usage data, as said, but not data of the individual users.
So would that also perhaps be part of some infrastructure like this?
Yes, it has to be, because without the usage data, you wouldn't be able to run a proper search engine.
Yeah. Olaf is. Let's go over to Olaf and see. You've been listening for a while about the different angles of the discussion. Any thoughts that you want to bring forward?
Well, we are getting into the legislation area, and I have to say, as Dirk said, it's not my speciality. But I think there are for sure. What we have been trying to do is to raise the question, to make this search engine problem, if you like, visible. And we have suggested one way of going in trying to make a change, but as we heard from Amelia, there are of course also other ways, and it's not an easy way, of course. And Dirk has some experience talking about this with the European Union, even though I do agree it's not only a European Union question.
One question, Olaf. When we talk about the I just I forgot it.
About the Open Web Index?
No. Here it is. Since this, you wrote this article, this opinion text yesterday, and if we don't take care of this problem, so to say, what do you think will happen in 10 years from now? What are you afraid of? What should be afraid of?
I think there are many things to be afraid of. One of them, of course, the user data and the way the user data is used and traded and transferred and so forth. That's a huge problem on its own. But if we talk about this question of competition and lack of competition, I think that the move that we can see in the search engine area from being a less search engine and more suggest engine maybe, that move, and also in combination with the fact that the search engine will be built in so many devices that are around us, that we will even think about it less than we do now. And when you only get a fact or a product or a service as the answer of a question or of a suggestion, then you are, and also if you regard the search engine as totally neutral and totally objective and just a truth engine, then you have the problem that you don't see the context, you don't see the other services, other products, other knowledge claims that could be involved in a certain topic or area or theme.
Okay, thank you. Amelia, I'm thinking, how much of a problem do you think this is? And being aware of this situation, what could be the worst thing happening if we don't do anything about it, you'd say?
Well, I mean, a lack of competition is always bad if you want innovation and kind of struggle. I think struggle is ultimately good for companies. But you also see actually Google is moving out. It's not very much dependent on its search business per se. Like they're trying to expand into other markets like mobile operating systems. They're extremely strong. They're building data centers and other forms of infrastructure. And it's ultimately because the long game, the funding model for the web, which is advertising, is not long-term sustainable for these companies. So they're trying to get into better funding situations. I mean, Microsoft has had a much smarter strategy by being weaseling themselves into the public sector, because public procurement is a long-term stable income that you survive on forever. And Google tries to do that also with educational platforms and such. I think there's a larger issue with this advertisement-funded model of web services, that where the idea of tax financing them, for instance, or publicly funding open web indexes is very interesting as a way of working around advertisement funding. Okay, so that's like one issue on the financing of the web. But then you have the autonomy of the individual. What might happen with that? Well, it's always difficult, like big sociological issues. But I want to emphasize a third point, which is industrial policy. That for the European Union, of course, there is an industrial policy issue and having local entities that are competitive, like that kind of strategic digital sovereignty. That we're not in the position that some other government can dictate for us or for our populations what kind of information our populations receive. And then it's a security issue to have a European competitor. And I think it's treated as such in the European Union and particularly by France. And so that's on the one hand like a real concern, which I understand. But on the other hand, it also means that, let's say that we make a really crappy European search engine that is really bad at helping people find what they want on the internet. Then the government might decide that it's in their security, governments of Europe might decide that for security reasons, we have to live with this terribly crappy service. And I don't think that this is necessarily a good alternative to Google either, but that certainly some of the rhetoric, not just in the European bubble here, but also in like the member states, goes in that direction.
Yeah. What do you agree with this, Dirk? It's I realize you don't think of a crappy version here. It's not what you're aiming at.
No, I'm not thinking about a search engine at all. I'm thinking about providing the infrastructure to build multiple search engines. And if you have hundreds or even thousands of companies or actors trying to build search engines, then of course most of them will fail, but some of them will get through. And that's, I think,
that's the core idea.
That's the core idea, and that's the beauty of the proposal.
Yeah.
And also, I think you also mentioned in your presentation, that's also important to remember, given what Amelia says, that search engines are but one part of the puzzle is that this index also can support multiple other ventures and projects that are not necessarily search engines or might be related, but go into different directions. I also want to say one more thing. It's about these alternative search engines. I don't know about the Czech example, but Quant, I think, do you know that Dirk probably uses Bing, because most alternative search engines uses Bing's index, don't they?
Yeah, most alternatives use Bing's index. I don't know about Quant, but
So Quant is trying to build its own index. It's one of the competitive features. Sorry, I'm butting in from.
Yeah, good.
But still,
some use combinations as well.
True. What we see with the competitors, and I don't know about the actual size of Quant's index, but I know that it's not comparable to the size of Google's or even Bing's index. And that really is the problem, because if you want to do a really good web search engine, you have to have all the content from the web, basically. Nobody has all the content, but still a very large proportion. And if you can't provide that, you will fail in the market. And the question for me is regarding Quant, what will they do in the future? Because in the way, at least as I see it, they can do a web search engine, but they will not be sustainable just providing the web search engine. And we saw from all the other companies that they targeted other markets like intranet search or company-wide search engines, things like that. And there they made their money. Nobody makes money with web search.
How much, since we are gathering around the artificial intelligence perspective here, how do you see, can that be a part of a solution, making it easier to take care of all this and this giant amount of data?
I mean, there is machine learning, artificial intelligence in this soup of things.
And quantum.
Yeah, possibly, but definitely. But I think the question of the index is kind of separate. But there is also this question of when you do want to do machine learning, artificial intelligence, you definitely need lots of data. And when in terms of data, we need to think about things like integrity and who owns the data, and not perhaps storing the user data, but the usage data, and doing that in a way that sort of makes it possible to do the machine learning in a good way, but still keeping up with GDPR or whatever. Finding out what the compromises there are so that you actually can do cool things, but still do it in a good way. I think that's interesting, and that's where you need all of these things. You need the legal issues, you need the technical, artificial intelligence, you need sort of everything to figure out how to bootstrap these things. But then I think the artificial intelligence machine learning also comes on top when you have the indices and you want to build the service. Then for sure you're going to develop lots of techniques in order to deliver the products.
Yeah. I'm going back to before we sum up this discussion, the question Juan Ocampo asked earlier about public-owned search engines. Would that be better hosted by universities? Are universities? No, then let's go to Olof. I saw you were waving. Is that a good idea, universities?
I just want to remind again what Jutta and Dirk said earlier. Our argument is not to build a search engine. It's not to build a publicly funded search engine, a kind of public service search engine of Europe or of Sweden or of Germany. It's about an open index that can be used by all kinds of different search engines companies to develop services, and other companies as well. So I think that universities, they are experimenting the way they should, but it's very difficult to compete with the commercial business as it is now, at least. But again, separate the search.
I realize.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
separate the search engine building question to the open index question.
Yeah.
I think that is important to remember.
So finally, at the end here, we're going to just let's go for this idea, open web index. So you can all choose one key success factor, how it will be possible. So let's start with Kalle.
How will we make this successful?
Yes. So we follow the idea that Dirk presented,
I think
we leave all the criticism
yes.
at the moment.
We've already talked a little bit about it, but we probably, definitely would need a sort of a pre-study, a pilot study, to figure out these difficult questions. What do we need to store in terms of usage data? How can we do that in a safe way? So that it enables what we want to do. So I think that the sort of the Indus part, the pure Indus part, I think it's relatively easy technically. It's costly, but finding out the things that sort of what extra data, how should it be stored, what kind of data should there be, and I think that's one of the key
feasibility study. Let's go to you, Olof. You're up next. What do you choose?
Okay. Okay, then I would pass on this question to Amelia and the policy level. We need access to policy level who could translate these ideas and similar ideas and to do the lobbying that is needed to be done on different policy board levels.
Okay, thank you. And continue with Jutta.
I can only agree with both Kalle and Olof, and I don't have the policy level is important. It's kind of is making this clear and communicating it in a good way to policymakers, to decision makers, but also to the public. And probably I want to finish with an image that is very useful here. It's like thinking about the street or the rail tracks and as the index, and the cars, the buses, and the public transport, the trains as the search engines. I think this is kind of the analogy that we are getting at, and we want to fund the street, we want to fund the rail tracks. That's what we want to fund.
The infrastructure perspective. Okay, thank you. Let's go to Amelia. So Dirk, he will sum this up. What are your thoughts? How can this be successful? What is needed?
So you need a critical mass of actors that help you pull in the right direction. The policy level can be conducive to this. But I don't want to pitch any particular services, but if you do get some money for a feasibility study, what could be interesting is reaching out to our successful Czech friends at Seznam, who have actually operated a very successful local search engine for the past 25, 30 years or so, and see if they've already made some conclusions on how you build a web index and what might keep that alive. Also,
can you just spell the
Seznam, SEZNAM.CZ.
Okay, so you can all go there if you want.
I think also Jutta's comment about digital infrastructure. So how do you make digital roads, because we talk a lot about cyber infrastructures also in political discourse, and cyber attacks, cyber this, cyber that. But when we talk about digital infrastructures, how can we give that a positive meaning that isn't just bitter blitzkrieg in the routers and switches, which is the way it's currently presented now. And so I think that there's kind of a broader positive framing work where maybe you cooperating with communication studies and such.
Thank you. And finally, final answer, Dirk, since you brought the idea to us all, what are we forgetting here?
After all these great statements, it's very hard to add another one. But I agree with everything that has been said in the final statements. But I want to add that it's not only the policy level and the legal stuff, but also I think we have to involve people and institutions that have been traditionally responsible of making information accessible and useful, which is the libraries and the whole information profession.
That final statement, I'll thank you for that, and I'll thank you all the panelists here in the center of Lund. And then Amelia, thank you for joining us. You're an old student here in Lund. What's your favorite place in Lund? Oh, we can't hear you now.
I muted myself.
What?
I like Café Hilbert at the mathematics faculty. So if you ever want really good coffee, go up to the engineers and have one.
Brilliant, Café
Okay.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Café Hilbert.
Yes, my favorite place too.
I've never heard of it.
It's in the math building.
Okay, sorry. Thank you all for participating. I heard you've got some, thrilling new thoughts, and I believe this will be a discussion going on. Thanks to you for your contributions, and this was all for today.
And thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. See you after the summer, I believe. This was the last Nordic AI pop-up live for now, and let's hope we can have audiences as well. So thanks for tonight. See you some other day.